So buenos dias to everybody. So we got one more day. We just got, I know a lot of us are on fumes, but this is going to energize us for Friday because, first of all, my name is Alberto Vasallo from El Mundo Boston and Channel 7. And if you missed yesterday, that's okay, because today we promised to be as good as yesterday. But yesterday was an incredible historic day. We had the first day. I really enjoyed Dr. Michael Eric Dyson's talk. He was terrific. Brought up so many deep issues that we can go on, and I think it sets it up for later as I was talking to Emerson. But if you missed it, that's fine. I know it's recorded, and the dinner group will make that available. But today, we will examine commitments to advance equity by industry. As many of you know, or maybe not know, over $50 billion was committed by companies. But what has happened? What have they accomplished? What's still left to be done? So before we hear from our very accomplished leaders from a number of sectors, I want to absolutely give a lot of props and love to our sponsors. And I know going through sponsors lists is tedious sometimes, but we have an all-star of sponsors that I want to give proper credit to because without them, all of these incredible conversations of today and yesterday would not have been able to take place. So I'm going to start with and these are, we're not even calling them sponsors. We're calling us our partners in change agents. Rockland Trust Company, East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, Acadian, Cambridge Health Alliance Foundation, TD Bank, Foundation Medicine, Commonwealth Financial, Boston Scientific, Vertex, Biogen, Beth Israel Lahey Health, Centify, Eastern Bank, Mass General Brigham, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Capital One, Sage Therapeutics, Cambridge Savings Bank, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Wellington Management, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Manulife, John Hancock Financials, Takeda, and Points 32 Health, which is a perfect segue. How did they come up last with this segue? Incredible how this happens, but I'm just kidding. We are now, it is my pleasure to introduce Points 32 Health CEO. I met him 2 weeks ago on Friday, very early at a breakfast, and now I meet him on another Friday. So as I told him, Friday mornings are our time to meet from here on in. But the gentleman I'm going to meet, he's new to Boston, so I want us all to, when we run into him, first thing we should say is welcome to Boston. He is now the CEO of Points 32 Health. He's a nationally recognized thought leader, and that's why his input today is important. He brings a national perspective and an advocate who will now, as I said, lead Points 32 Health of New England, which is New England's largest nonprofit health and well-being organization. As many of you know, Point 32 Health is what has happened now with the merger of Tufts Health Plan, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. In totality, it is the largest independent health plan in New England. So they carry a lot of weight, a lot of influence, and can make a lot of change. And that's what the important thing is. He is a gentleman that brings a healthcare and financial service experience of over 25 years. So we welcome him to Boston. And now I welcome him to the dinner group's Men of Color Conference. Buenos dias, Cain. The only difference is you're home now. The last time I had you in a hotel at 7 in the morning.
That's right. Thank you so much, Alberto. Great to see you again. I just have to say I'm thrilled to be here to not only represent Point 32 Health, but to really just serve as today's moderator for a fireside chat with today's honorable keynote speaker, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Attorney General Ellison is certainly no stranger to all of you tuning in today. He has spent his life dedicated to justice and equity from the time he started as a civil rights and defense attorney to his years serving in Congress, representing the great state of Minnesota's 5th Congressional District, which includes the city of Minneapolis. In 2020, while in the midst of the ongoing pandemic, he played a crucial role in what many believe was a turning point in our country in terms of racial justice and the fight for equality, the murder of George Floyd and the conviction of Derek Chauvin this year. I just have to say it really is a point of personal privilege for me to moderate today's discussion with you, Attorney General Ellison, because ironically, thank you. Ironically, I was living and working, as we talked about, in Minnesota back in 2018, and I distinctly remember how proud I was to witness history when you were elected in November of that year as Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, making you the first African-American to be elected to statewide office in the history of Minnesota. At the time, I was president and COO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and was the first African-American man to sit in the C-suite of a major healthcare company in Minnesota. I thought that was a big deal, but that was
nothing. It was and is. It was and is.
Nothing compared to you being elected Attorney General. But I'm just honored to be here with you today, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Well, Cain, let me tell you, thank you to you for inviting me, and also to Alberto. Let me say, un placer conocerlo. So let's start talking, man. I'm very pleased to be with you, with everybody.
All right, that's great. You know, before we dive in, I do want to take the opportunity to recognize the recent passing of a great American hero, General Colin Powell. Oh, yeah. He was not only a great leader and a statesman, but a man who deeply loved and served his country. I read a book that General Powell wrote about 10 years ago, and the title was really very simple. The title of the book that he wrote was called "It Worked for Me." And that included 13 life lessons to live by. And two of those lessons that really resonated with me were, he said, avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. So I've always remembered that lesson. And then the other, he said, is perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. And so again, I love those insights. I want to start our discussion today by focusing, Keith, on your early career. I like to call you Attorney General Ellison, but I know you prefer to go by Keith. But I like the sound of Attorney General Ellison. But you know, so obviously you've been a public figure for a long time. Prior to your tenure as Congressman and now Attorney General, you were a civil rights and defense attorney. And so we know the public persona of Keith Ellison, but maybe tell us a couple things that people may not know about you.
I love to be in the woods, be in nature. I love to ride my mountain bike in the northern shore of Minnesota. You know, I love to spend time near the fire with my wife in the wintertime. You know, I'm an amateur guitar player, and during COVID, I picked up the cello. So wow. I love music. I'm not that good at it, but I can still love it, right? And those are just a few things that I do that mean a lot to me, and kind of part of who I am as a person.
That's great. Yeah, and I, having spent time in Minnesota, I know how important it is to get outdoors. I mean, people really enjoy the outdoors here, and I did too. Growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer, but my career actually took quite a different track.
I think you did okay. I think Mom is pretty proud of you just with what you did.
It worked out okay. Out okay. But can you talk a little bit about the beginning of your career and how you chose the profession of law, and maybe what was some of the impetus for decisions that you made early in your career and how it shaped where you are today?
Well, when I was a kid, my mom is a woman from Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana. Her father, a guy named Frank Martinez, raised her and taught her the value of fighting for civil rights and human rights. And he was a leader in NAACP in that time. And he actually was so much of an annoyance to the folks who wanted to maintain segregation that they refused to sell him gasoline. They burned across on the other side of the street. They lived on Lee Street. That's Robert E. Lee Street, of course, in Louisiana would be. and they burned a cross across the street from the house, and they would pull trees out into the road when he and his colleagues were giving speeches and encouraging people to vote. And they would have to figure, should I get out of the car and move this log and risk getting shot, or should I try to figure out how to drive around it? Anyway, they also told me that during those days, there were very few hotels where African-American people, Black people, brown people could stay. And actually Thurgood Marshall and Walter White, according to family legend, stayed at my grandfather and grandmother's home on Lee Street in Natchitoches, the city of Natchitoches, Louisiana. And so, I grew up fascinated with Thurgood Marshall. I grew up fascinated with Charles Hamilton Houston. I grew up fascinated with these people who used the law to literally, they destroyed white supremacy and created a multiracial democracy. I think that it is critical for us to understand that in the from 1877 on up to 1965, we did not live in true democracy, right? We lived in a white democracy. I don't say that to be obstreperous or provocative. It is a statement of fact, provable in a multitude of ways. And anybody who lived during that time thinks it's, well, of course, right? But my point is, these people inspired me. And although we have left, Jim Crow segregation era and we've entered multiracial democracy, we still live in a society where we don't have full and equal liberty and justice for all. And, I just found myself dedicated to that goal, to pursue it, to believe that it was what I should spend my short time on earth doing. And so that's what I'm doing. I got a master's in economics before I went to law school, because while my mom taught me to fight for civil and human rights, my dad taught me to follow the money. And
yeah.
So that's just sort of the ingredients, that went into the person that I chose to be.
Yeah, no, that's so inspiring and just a really interesting start to your career. You were in Congress for 12 years.
Yes.
And you were seen as a leader and certainly championed consumer, labor, environmental, civil and human rights protection, just to name a few. You were also deputy chair of the DNC.
Yes.
And I just have to ask, during your time in Congress, was there a particular case that you feel really defines what it means to hold society accountable, or any bills that you were proud of that you sponsored during your long tenure in Congress?
Yeah, there are a lot of bills. There were bills that I worked on and drove individually. And there are also a lot of bills that I worked on with groups of people. The one I'll pick out is after the 2008 foreclosure crisis, we passed the Dodd-Frank Act, which reformed the financial services sector. And, we set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, including a lot of people in the business community. And my case to them was, you're an honest business person. You are trying to put forth a good product at a fair price. And you're in this business because you believe that people should have financial freedom. They should be able to borrow the money to go to college, to buy a house, to get a car, whatever you're talking about. Do you really want to be in competition with somebody who has no moral principles at all? How can you compete if you're honest and your competition is not? So we had a lot of conversations like that, and I believe that markets are important. I also believe in the public sector. I'm not pure market guy. I'm a mix. I believe in both. I believe that we need balance. But I believe that piece of legislation, though it could have gone farther and there could have been more, and that's just the way Congress is. I believe that we've made substantial gains, and making sure that people, don't buy trouble, right? Don't get into a mortgage that they can't afford that's going to explode on them in 2 or 3 years and ruin their financial prospects for prosperity. And I think I was really happy to be a part of that. I thought that the Affordable Care Act, which, was actually a big group effort, another critical bill that I thought, put healthcare within the grasp of people who previously could not afford it. I'm one of those people who, from a market standpoint, believes we should have 100% access to quality, affordable healthcare. It undermines our competitiveness as a country to have a sector of people who have to go to work sick because they got no other choice. We have 12 states that have refused to expand Medicaid, which to me is insane, but that's what they're doing. And so I thought I was very glad to be part of that bill. Again, I want to go more. I think we can go further. But as a legislator, I've always been one of those people who would be willing is once we can get to yes on something, I'll put that gain in my pocket and then go back to the table and get more, as opposed to saying, if I can't get everything, I don't want anything. I don't believe in that kind of legislating. I don't think it's wise. So those are just a few big things. I will mention some things I did individually if we have time. One of them is in the middle of the foreclosure crisis, I noticed that there are a lot of people who paid every single penny of their rent that was expected of them. They never missed a payment, and they still found themselves foreclosed upon. Why? Because they lived in an apartment building and they were paying rent to a landlord whose mortgage went into foreclosure. And a lot of people across the country have very few rights when their landlord goes into foreclosure. And so I passed a bill called the Protecting Tenants in Foreclosure Act, which gave people a 90 days as opposed to immediate, you're out. And I thought that was good. In the beginning, the banks were like, we don't like this. You're encumbering our property. We think this is a bad idea. By the time it was over, the banks were like, it's kind of better to have a tenant in the place, even if it goes to foreclosure, because if it's empty, people strip out the coppers. So thank you. I'm like, why don't you listen to me? I'm not trying to screw you here, but I've learned over the course of my legislative career that oftentimes people think that things are not going to go well, actually are fine. Catalytic converters, as an example. A lot of things, limiting DDT, saved the eagles and did not destroy industry. So often we can come up with a compromise that lets everybody sort of thrive and survive. So those are just a few things. And also I was key I actually had a push the credit card holders Bill of Rights. There was a bill that I authored that banned the practice of universal default, meaning that let's say you have 5 credit cards, say you're late on one. Now we know that if you are late on one, you're going to have adverse action on that one. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of fair because you got, that's what it is. But should you go up on all? That's called universal default. And I said, no, if you can take adverse action, you can increase the interest rate on the defaulted debt, but not all the others. And again, I just thought that was something that helped the middle class and was fair. And I was glad that we were able to pass it. There's more, but I'll stop there.
Well, no, I tell you, all of those resonate with me. It's interesting. I spent the first 20 years of my career actually in financial services. So I was actually in financial services in 2008 during that crisis. So
you remember
yeah, absolutely. So that work you did was so important. I'm not sure people realize how close we came to utter collapse in terms of the financial system and going into a deep depression. So,
Cain, do you remember that weekend when the Treasury Secretary said on a Friday, if you don't approve $800 billion by Monday, the economy may just collapse.
That's right.
And Congress then got the bill on the Monday and then did not pass it. And then by Friday, everybody went back home, listened to their financial services folks, and was like, we passed it.
That's right.
I voted, and I know that it was controversial, but I'm not an expert, and I've studied a lot, and I think I'm conversant, but some people know the very fine details of the system. I just knew that it was not a good idea to make some of the people who did make bad, risky loans. We could punish them by not passing the bill, but what we would have done is driven the economy into a depression. And I'm sure that was probably a bad idea.
Yeah, that's right. No, so true. The late civil rights pioneer and leader, John Lewis, is another
love him.
a hero that I admire greatly. And I know you served in Congress with him. And I believe you were once arrested with John Lewis for civil disobedience
Very
at a
true.
protest in Washington, D.C. And I just have to ask you to tell me about that time and what was he like? I never had the pleasure of meeting John Lewis, but what happened during that time and what was he like and what lessons did he impart on you that influence you today?
Well, Cain, you've been around the block, and so you've met successful people who may be very talented, but lack a certain sense of humility. Have you ever had that experience?
Absolutely.
People who they're good, but they know it, and they think they think everybody else needs to bow down because of it. This is absolutely the opposite of John Lewis. John Lewis was a genius. He was a brilliant man. He had a brilliant, he was a smart guy here, but he was an absolute towering genius morally, and so, wow, I was just so privileged to be with him. And, when you vote in Congress, we all just walk in the House floor and sit down, and people can sit anywhere they want. I would often choose to sit next to John Lewis and just ask him, what do you think about this? What would Martin Luther King have done? What did y'all face? So, just ask. He would always be more than happy to share. When I got arrested with him, quite honestly, getting arrested is disconcerting. If you've ever had the displeasure of having the clicks, the cuffs click around your wrists, it's like, oh boy, this is not a joke. Well, to him, it was nothing to him. It wasn't nothing to him. He was like, oh, here we go. He would be chatting up the officers who had to arrest us. How y'all doing today? Oh, fine, Mr. Lewis. They're not too tight, are they, sir? Oh no, it's okay. I mean, he was, the thing is, he was a very sweet man. That's what he was. I don't know if you can see this picture,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's a great picture. Yeah.
But in the middle is my good friend Raul Grijalva from Arizona, and John Lewis and myself. And, he just was beyond description. And again, if you ever find yourself being a great pianist, a great wide receiver, a great business executive, if you ever sense, I'm really good at this, please take a moment to just be humble and thankful to God for the talent you've been given. As much as we want to say we're good because we're just gifted and we worked hard, a lot of times it's luck, man. Even if the luck you got is genes, even if you're smart because your daddy and mommy were smart, don't obsess on your greatness. It's fleeting. Life is very short. And bottom line is, when they put us in a box, nobody's really going to care. Nobody's going to say, oh, that guy made a lot of money. They might say that, but it's more likely that they're going to say, but he wasn't a very nice person. Yeah. Or he was a wonderful, generous person. He gave of his time. John Lewis is a man who will never be forgotten because he just gave that much love and put that much goodness into the world. And it doesn't really matter what you do. You may not, those of us who are on the call today, we may not ever be as well known as John Lewis, but we have the ability to do good like John Lewis. And I hope that we follow his example from that.
Yeah, such valuable lessons, and all of those lessons are just great reminders, I think, for all of us.
Can I tell you one more thing, Cain? I do apologize. So there was this one video about John that I just love. This video. I still watch it sometimes. The song by Pharrell, Happy.
Yeah.
and he's just in his office dancing to Happy. And he must have been, 78, 80 years old. He didn't care. He was just in his office. And you could tell he was truly happy. He went to his grave light. Don't feel sorry for John Lewis, man. He didn't miss nothing. He didn't skip nothing. And he went to his reward, a happy man. And I wish that for all of us.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Oh, yeah.
Man, there's so much I want to talk to you about. Let's turn to your current role as Minnesota Attorney General, and just curious why after 12 years in Congress, you decided to run for statewide office in your home state of Minnesota. And for those attending today's virtual conference, can you explain your primary responsibilities, and are they the same for attorney generals from state to state? Is it uniform or is it different? Maybe talk a little bit about your current role.
Yeah, so the reason I left Congress and went to be the Attorney General is because although Congress is a very important job, they write the laws of our country. So much of how your average person experiences law has to do with the enforcement of it, right? So we can write a law that says everybody should be able to buy a home without regard to their race and get credit and be treated fairly. But is that actually happening? Congress can't stop that. They can have a hearing and shed a light on whether people are violating the law that they wrote or not, but they can't actually go in there and say, you're gonna do it or we're gonna sue you, And so I decided to go to the law enforcement side because I felt that we need more good laws, but we have enough laws for people to have a good life if we would follow them. And so I decided to go to do that. People thought, oh man, you're leaving the fight, brother. Why are you doing that? I said, man, I'm running to the fight.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I'm going from the middle line to the front line. And because in Congress, we passed the Affordable Care Act, but we couldn't implement it. But me and my fellow attorneys general went to court to defend it in court. We passed the Affordable Care Act, and we passed the environmental regulations. We passed a lot of things that I ended up in court defending when the Trump administration ordered the United States Postal Service to slow down the mails because he was worried about people voting by mail. We sued the United States Postal Service and won in court, proving that they were deliberately trying to tamper with the mails in order to favor one political candidate over another. I mean, when somebody came and said that they were going to come to Minnesota and have armed people posted up at voting sites, I sued that company, and we got up in their face pretty bad. And so, and there's a lot of things that I've been able to do that I could never do as a member of Congress. And the George Floyd case, I could not do that as a member of Congress. Right. So that's kind of what do I do? What do AGs do? So all 50 states and 7 territories have AGs. An AG is rooted in English common law and in French law that goes back 600-700 years ago. Originally, the job was to be the lawyer that protected the rights and the authorities of the sovereign. And then it kind of skipped over to the United States, and the job got to be more when there is no king. So who does the AG represent? The people. So I actually can say that I represent the people. So when the AG sues somebody, it says Keith Ellison, Attorney General versus X. So that authority comes with the job. And my job is basically, and I'll say very quickly, 2 or 3-fold. One position is to represent the people. That there's a Latin term called parens patriae, which says, father or I have the authority to represent the people of the state and can sue on their behalf. And the other authority that I have is to represent all state agencies. So I represent Department of Corrections, Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Agriculture, Department, all these folks. And then the third thing I do is kind of a collection bag where I'm on the pardon board. I get to pardon people. I am on the board that regulates state land mineral leasing. I'm on the board that makes a lot of critical executive decisions. And so are they all the same? No, but they're all substantially the same. They're not all the same, but they're all substantially the same. And I will just let you know that Maura Healey, who's the Attorney General in Massachusetts, is extremely highly respected. She's well liked. She is certainly a leader. And we do a lot of multi-state litigation. So all of you all know the ravages of opioid addiction in our country. Well, attorneys general came together to sue the opioid manufacturers and distributors and marketers. And we did that together on a non-partisan basis. We had Republicans and Democrat AGs all jumping in. A lot of the issues revolving fair competition and monopoly that are around, now a part of the conversation when it comes to our large tech companies. Many of us have joined suits there. Not that we're against the tech companies in general, but there are certain anti-competitive practices which we think discourage innovation, drive up prices, and are not good for competition overall. So that's what we do. And I would say to everybody on the call, try to build a relationship with your Attorney General's office. Get to know the AG, invite the AG in to talk and say, like, what are you doing? It's not just something that helps consumers, it helps small business people. And let's just say you're a company that might potentially find yourself on the business end of the AG focus. It's good to at least know how they function and operate, right? So for example, AGs have an authority that other lawyers do not have. Actually, we have many, but one of them is something called pre-trial discovery. If you're a lawyer, you can't really start dropping interrogatories and document requests and notices of deposition until after you file your lawsuit. But an AG doesn't have to wait. We can just start investigating the case before we file a lawsuit. And if we find there's nothing there, we can just say it's over, sorry. And if there is something there, we can say, look, we can go public on this thing, or we can try to settle it. What do you want to do? But so that's an important thing that you should know. And you should also know that AGs are not, our job is to not represent any industry. Our job is to represent the people. We don't have any incentive. We're not like plaintiffs lawyers who are looking for, look, I love plaintiff lawyers. I'm not trying to criticize plaintiffs lawyers, but look, I've been a plaintiff's lawyer. So I know that when I'm suing you, I'm trying to figure out how I'm getting my third out of this, right? Nothing wrong with it. That's how the industry works. But as Attorney General, I don't care about my third because there is no third. I get paid out of the state appropriation. We're only looking for a good outcome, for a just outcome, for a fair outcome. And so that is something that people should know. Even if you represent a company that could find itself getting sued by the AG, it's good to have a relationship, because then you can say, look, this person made a mistake. We're willing to fix it. A lot of times AG will like, okay, fix it and we're good. A lot of times the AG might say, well, you kind of did that. Why don't you give some money to charity over here and we'll let it go. I recently filed a lawsuit against a company that was engaging in price gouging during the pandemic, which was illegal during the pandemic, but only civilly illegal. I didn't want nothing of them. I just said, look, you're going to give 1 million eggs to food shelves and food pantries for homeless people and poor folk. And that's all I want from you. Don't give me nothing. I don't want a civil penalty, but you just got to do that. So this is sort of a little bit about the AG, but it's a good thing to have that relationship.
No, that's very helpful and some great advice. Before we open it up for questions from the audience, I do want to talk to you a little bit about racial injustice. And you mentioned George Floyd. And I just have to say, as a Black man in this country, and this is the Men of Color Conference, right? And as a Black man in this country, I have certainly had some experiences with police that have not been positive. And in fact, I think most people who know me know that I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. But what most people don't know, and you and I talked about this, is I actually grew up in Ferguson, which is a suburb of St. Louis. Lewis. And so, you know, the social unrest resulting from the killing of Michael Brown really hit home for me personally. I mean, I was personally, as a teenager, pulled over by the Ferguson police and had a very negative experience. And so it really hit home for me as I watched on TV as the neighborhood I grew up in literally went up in flames. And then, of course, living in Minnesota and having driven by the intersection where George Floyd was murdered.
You know that area?
I know that area well. And I was literally numb when my daughter came in with her cell phone to show me that video, that Memorial Day weekend last year. So, you know, not that you weren't a national figure before, because you were, but certainly your work as prosecutor and the Derek Chauvin murder of George Floyd has certainly brought a different kind of national attention for you. And the theme for this year's Men of Color Conference is holding ourselves, organizations, and society accountable. Holding ourselves, organizations, and society accountable. Why was it so important for you to ensure that the officers involved were held accountable? And for those of us that weren't there to live it firsthand, why was justice so important? And what about the dynamics of this case made it so different? Like I talked about Ferguson, and we could go down a long list. What made this different? And how did these events of 2020 change you? So I know there's a lot in there, but love to just—
No, it's okay. Well, you know, somebody wrote a book called The Banality of Evil, right? I don't know if you're familiar with this book, The Banality of Evil. And but you know what the point of the book was, the ordinariness of evil, right? Wrong that just became routine. Wrong which just became how we do things around here. Like slavery was ordinary, was everyday, was something that people just accepted as the way it was, but it was nonetheless an evil institution. And so why do I mention that? Because so much of what happened to George Floyd was not in any way remarkable. I mean, George Floyd was murdered, tortured and murdered on video. Rodney King was tortured on video, fortunately not murdered. Walter Scott was executed on video. Laquan McDonald was executed on video. Eric Garner was choked to death on video. So it's really not that unusual. The very first statements that the municipality made regarding all those guys is they minimized what happened. Well, that's what happened to George Floyd. The original statement from the Minneapolis Police Department is that he died in a medical emergency. And it wasn't until 17-year-old Darnella Frazier's video hit before we knew what really happened. If there had not been video, the people who were there would have said they killed that man. And most folks would have thought, you know, really, you think so? Maybe, we'll see, can't prove it, you know. And this would have been, it would have just been relegated to the sandbag of history. But what it also would have done is added to the overall feeling of angst and anxiety and fear and vulnerability in the Black community. And, you know, but the one thing about the video that was helpful, and I hope that it makes a difference, is that a lot of middle-class white folks and wealthy ones were able to see that 9-minute and 29-second. And so like when Keith and Cain say, these atrocities are happening, our counterparts don't look at us and say, yeah, I hear you, but I've just never gone through anything like that. I've never seen anything like that. So I just kind of think you might be right, but maybe you're exaggerating. Actually, you can't say that we're making it up. And you kind of knew that we weren't. You know, we're not. But, you know, one of the things about this kind of state-sponsored violence, because this is violence, you know, carried out by agents of the state under color of law, right? Is that it's been around for quite a long time, and that we don't really ever do anything about it as a social problem. And so, Cain, you're from Missouri, and so you're just a few hour drive away from Chicago. Right. In 1919, and I didn't say 1990, 1919, there was a horrific act of police inaction and violence against Black communities in Chicago. And there was a civil unrest as a result. And Black folks were killed and, injured and hurt. And there was an investigative report about policing in Chicago in 1990. There was one in Harlem in 1934, another one in Harlem, 1943. There was the McCone Commission with the LA about the Watts riots. Then there was the Kerner Commission in 1968 that looked at over thousands of riots across the United States. Then there was the 21st Century Policing Report, which stemmed out of Ferguson. But then there was other investigative, this is a problem. Chronic excessive force against a targeted minority group that results in massive civil judgments and settlements, expensive civil unrest, loss of life. It allows people like Vladimir Putin to look into the United States and say, the United States is my enemy. I can drive wedges between them because of their racial division and the chronic excessive force from certain sectors of law enforcement. It's a national security threat. It breaks down trust. Think about this, Cain. You're a Black man, grew up in Missouri. How many people do you know who might see a private citizen commit an act of violence or crime, but might be a little reluctant to call the police because they just don't believe in the police? Right. And so those people who would create mayhem in our neighborhoods are a little freer to do so because they don't have any confidence in the police. And then the story gets told, well, Black people, they tolerate crime and violence in their neighborhood. No, we would call if they would answer. Right. And when we do call, sometimes the person who calls ends up getting shot. Yeah. So I believe that police misconduct being allowed to exist with impunity also contributes to violence in our communities by private individuals. Because private individuals know they ain't coming. And by the way, snitches get stitches. You know that, right? And so we know that we end up trapped between desperate individual private citizens who commit acts of violence and mayhem and crime in our neighborhood, and the state, which excessively polices us but underprotects us. Right. And so all these reasons, bring us to a point where this is an urgent problem that we need to deal with. And I'll just say this: the business case for reform is strong. In Minneapolis alone, after the summer of 2020, we saw 500 buildings burned down on Lake Street. Wow. What is the cumulative loss of assets? How much in the way of insurance payouts, and what did our premiums look like afterwards? Right. There is a business case. Look, I know the Men of Color Conference has a lot of highly successful brothers out there. Guys, you're a businessman. You're trying to turn a profit. Stop preventing police misconduct. Stops civil judgment award payouts, which means you have more money to devote to services. Mm-hmm. Saves lives, prevents civil unrest, protects our national security. And guess what? Makes policing a better job, which encourages recruitment. Right. But if you got a job where nobody likes you, people are mad at you, they don't believe in you, they distrust you, your family calls you a pig or a sellout, it's not good. Police are good. I know so many good, decent people who wear the badge, really decent people who would do anything, who run into a burning building to save your life. Absolutely. That's who the cops are. But so often, like my son got out of the military and I said, why don't you think about joining the police department, son? He's like, I don't know, Dad. I mean, a lot of my friends don't like them. Maybe I'll be a firefighter. I mean, and so, I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's an honor to be a police officer. And I want to preserve and restore the reputation of that profession. And I think that we need to take serious reform measures. And you know what, Cain, it can happen. I mean, Newark, New Jersey, under the leadership of Ras Baraka, mayor there, talk about a dynamic man of color. They underwent reforms in 2020. There were no officer involved shootings in Newark.
Wow.
And none like that. And they had zero payouts and civil judgments. They had no riots. And Newark had a long, serious chronic problem with policing. We can talk more about it, but I'm just saying the case for reform is strong.
Yeah.
Police officers will have better work quality and life and experiences. Anyway, enough preaching.
Well, this is a great discussion, man, and I got so much more I could ask you, but I do want to. We have some questions that have come in from the audience that are on the line. So why don't we open it up to the team if there's questions that we can ask Attorney General Ellison.
All right. Thank you, Cain and Keith. Both of you have power names. It's almost like Starsky and Hutch, right? It's like, man, it's a powerful combination, and what a great conversation. So thank you. But there are a couple of questions from the audience and that are really relevant to the conversation. Keith, what do you think of, what is going to take for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to get passed in both houses? So let's start there.
I think that we need, I'll take it in a two-part way. One is that, I'm sorry, but we need to mobilize people in West Virginia and Arizona and put a lot of pressure on Sinema and Manchin. There's just no way around it. Two, we need to just get rid of the filibuster. It is a Jim Crow relic. It has been used to block progress for many, many decades. And then three, we need to really rethink how we do voting engagement, because I think that you have a lot of communities where you could really increase voter turnout by 5-6% in a year, which could really change things. But we don't always emphasize voter turnout in getting new and occasional voters out. And if we all said, rather than just getting the people who always vote to vote for us, what if we increase the number of people who are skeptical or occasional voters, but who really do want to have government work for them, and increase that? We could do that, and we could get the John Lewis. But let me just tell you, it is important to understand that there are people in our country who view the John Lewis Justice and Voting, the voting bills, they view them as an existential threat to their power. And do people, what did Frederick Douglass teach us? Power concedes nothing without a demand, and never did and never will, right? And so, you got to understand you're up against people who believe that their ability to control you and the world around us hinges upon their ability to suppress the vote. They are not going to give it to you. They will not do it. They simply won't do it. So the question is, how can we do it without them? And so we've got to pressure. Everybody can continue to write to and talk about Manchin and Sinema, and then we've got to get enough senators to pass it. I mean, the truth is there are people who'd rather have they would rather have their power than have democracy. They would prefer to say, I don't give a crap about people having to say so in their own government. I want to rule them in my interests. And that is what we're up against. I think it's important to keep it in mind. And I'll just say, for those of you who want to get extra credit, study something called replacement theory. You can just use your internet, your search engine. I don't rep any search engine. I'm not out there to pump any one of them. There's a lot of them. You don't just have to use the one that starts with a G. You could use the other one. But study replacement theory, and they'll give you a little insight into why, just because it's democratic, just because it's right, just because it's fair, just because it's moral, they will never, ever, ever do it. They just won't. Remember, the South went to war, started a war with the North before Lincoln took office, before he took office. They were trying to kill him on his way from Springfield, Illinois to Washington. They were trying to murder the man on his way there. And they all said very explicitly why they seceded. Because we need slaves to run our economy. And Lincoln didn't even say he was going to get rid of slavery. He said he was going to stop, not do any new slave states. He just said, we don't want to expand it, but we'll let you keep your slaves where they are. And a lot of abolitionists didn't like Lincoln because he was kind of thought as milquetoast. But he grew to understand, this is a killer be killed situation. These people ain't playing with me. And I'm telling you today, they ain't playing with you. And if they would, look, January 6th, they're waving Confederate flags. Ask yourself what that means. And if the people who attacked the Capitol would be willing to destroy the citadel of liberty in America, to stop a democratic election and then lie about it, ask yourself how many voluntary votes you can expect out of them.
Deep, deep indeed. Listen, we are in perilous times for sure. And so to that end, I mean, you left Congress to go to be in the front lines. And we need more people like you in your positions, people who look like us in your positions, to make progress. So how real is progress? And do you feel encouraged by what little progress we've made so far in the struggle for civil rights and economic advancement and all the things that we're doing for our community? How do you feel we're doing? And do you continue to be optimistic about what our future looks like in terms of civil rights, voting rights, or whatever it is that we need to continue to struggle for and fight for?
Answer is yes, full stop. I'm very optimistic. Because I think a lot of times when people are feeling really frustrated, they say, oh man, this is just like slavery days. This is nothing like slavery days, bro. And if you think it is, you need to crack a book because you have no idea what slavery was like. Imagine, and look, slavery existed from 1619 to 1865 in the United States. Some of our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean got out of slavery a little earlier, some, but around the same time. And if they stuck you in a boat and maybe you got off in Jamaica, maybe you got off in the Dominican, and maybe you got off in New Orleans, but we were all on the same boat, right? And then even the African brothers and sisters were under colonization, which is another form of slavery in your own country. So we have gone through this. I'm very optimistic because there was a time when you couldn't own your own children. They weren't yours. They were articles of merchandise for somebody else's profit. And it went on for 250 years. There were times when if you tried to escape, you'd be charged with a crime. Crime of what? Yourself. There was a time where they could dismember your body and mutilate you if you tried to be free, cut off your foot, cut off your hand. It was not a crime to kill a slave. They could murder you. Your wife, your daughter, your mother absolutely had no virtue to be protected. The Supreme Court Justice of the United States, Roger Taney, said the Black man has no rights which a white man is bound to respect. No rights, like no rights, right to life, right to no rights. You were a chicken and a cow. And if you think what you're going through now is like that, then you don't have any respect for your ancestors. Sorry, I'm just gonna put it like that. And then after it was up, and when it was over, it wasn't over. Because even after 1865, we did have a little flowering of Reconstruction, but by 1890, they were lynching Black folks 2 or 3 a week. They were passing Black codes. Remember Homer Plessy, who looked pretty white. If you ever seen a picture of Homer Plessy versus Ferguson, yeah, but he wasn't. He was too Black for them. He was too Black for them. They said you can't sit in this part of the car, even if you is they called him an octoroon, which is 1/8. But and if he couldn't sit where he wanted to sit, none of us 3 could sit on the damn bus. Baby, get out of here. And then so we went through this. I would commend a book called Sundown Towns to the readers. Sundown Towns by James Lowen. I hope y'all read this book. Please read this book, Sundown Towns by James Lowen. Ferguson, Cain's hometown, was a sundown town. You could not move there if you were Black. Suddenly it changed, but for years and years, they would, and there's a city not too far from East St. Louis called Anna, Illinois. Anna, A-N-N-A, and it stands for something. And we're polite, educated Black men, so we don't use the N-word. So I'm just gonna say N-word, but it stands for ain't no N-word allowed. Anna, that's what it meant. And there were over 500 sundown towns in the state of Illinois. There weren't that many in the South, interestingly, because they wanted their servants living near them. But there's plenty in the West. Levittown. They explicitly said, oh, and it wasn't just individual racist white people. It was state sponsored. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, said we will not insure mortgages that do not contain restrictive covenants in the deeds. We won't do it. Yeah. So Black people, while white people were getting homes with cheap mortgages insured by the federal government, Black people were renters. So we get into the 1990s and 2000s, never having had a chance to own our own home. So when they finally say, yeah, we'll rent y'all homes, but we're going to give you subprime mortgages.
Okay, listen, dropping some knowledge.
I'll stop. Sorry about it.
No.
Anyway, am I optimistic? Yes, it's better than it was.
Absolutely.
My question is, what are you going to do to make it better than it is now into the future?
Exactly, and that's exactly.
I have a bad habit of going on too much, man.
No.
Well, listen, we could be here all day listening to you. Seriously.
No, but just forgive the brother. He's like that,
No worries. I know you're dropping some knowledge, but I just want to thank you again, Keith, Cain. Thank you, and Point 32 for sponsoring this men's dinner conference. On behalf of the dinner conference, we just want to thank you both. We are going to transition now to more knowledge dropping, and that is the education panel. So Keith, safe travels. Cain, we'll see you around. Welcome to Boston again, and we'll see you both hopefully